I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. But the moment the words left my mouth, I knew something had shifted forever. Did anyone actually ask me before coming in? I was still standing in the doorway, grocery bags cutting into my arms, when I saw her. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, stood right in the center of my living room like she had always belonged there. 2 large suitcases rested beside her, perfectly upright, as if they had been waiting for me to arrive so they could make their announcement. I hadn't even taken off my shoes yet. She looked startled for a split second, then quickly covered it with that familiar little laugh, the one she used whenever she wanted to deflect discomfort back onto someone else. "Oh, Ava, I didn't hear you come in." Her tone was light, casual, pleasant, as though this were a coincidence, as though it were normal for me to walk into my own home and find someone already settled inside. I didn't respond right away. I stayed exactly where I was, arms aching, groceries dangling, staring at the suitcases first, then at her. "I asked you something," I said calmly. "Did anyone ask me?" Chloe brushed a strand of her styled hair behind her ear, buying herself time. Her eyes flicked around the room before landing back on me with that polite, patronizing smile I had learned to recognize over the years. "Iva, you're making this sound bigger than it is," she said gently. "Dion and I just need a place for a few days." "A few days." "They're renovating our condo," she continued. "The drilling starts early, it goes on all day. We can't work. We can't sleep. It's unbearable. We figured coming here would make sense." She gestured vaguely around my home. "You live alone. You have extra rooms." There it was. Not a request, a conclusion. I finally stepped inside and set the grocery bags on the table. The sound was sharp, metal cans knocking against wood, loud enough to make Chloe stiffen. I didn't unpack anything. I didn't move toward the kitchen. I rested my hands on the table and felt my heartbeat in my fingertips. "Does Dion know you're here?" I asked. Chloe exhaled, clearly annoyed now. "Of course he knows. It was his idea," she said. "He's finishing some work and will be over later with the rest of our things." "I assumed he told you." He hadn't. And that silence told me more than any explanation ever could. I looked at the suitcases again, expensive ones. New. The kind Chloe loved showing off online while I still owned the same worn suitcase I'd been dragging around for over a decade. "And you thought this was acceptable?" I asked. To arrive like this without asking, without waiting for an answer. Her posture changed. Arms crossed, shoulders squared. "Ava, you're Diane's mother?" she said. "We're family. This shouldn't be complicated. A family." That word had been used against me my entire life. Before I could respond, the lock turned. The door opened. And Diane walked in like he owned the place. "Mom," he said cheerfully, carrying more bags. "Your home filled you in, right? We'll only be here a short while." He dropped the bags beside the others, smiled like this was already settled, and walked straight into my kitchen. I watched him open my refrigerator, watched him take a bottle of water I had just bought, watched him drink it without asking. In that moment, something inside me went very still. "How long is a short while?" I asked. He shrugged. 2 max. 2 weeks. 14 days of my routines interrupted. 14 days of sharing space I had fought to finally make my own. "And you didn't think to ask me first," I said. Diane laughed lightly. "Mom, come on. You're my mother. I didn't think I had to." That sentence hurt more than any argument could have, because it confirmed everything. To him, my home wasn't mine. It was his fallback. And as I stood there, watching my son and his wife take over the quiet life I had built piece by piece, I realized something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't about staying a few days. This was about whether I was still allowed to own my own life. And I finally knew. Whatever happened next, I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I stood there for a long moment, watching Diane drink from my refrigerator like nothing unusual was happening. Like this was just another normal day, like he hadn't crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I realized then how dangerous familiarity can be. It makes people forget respect. "How long is a short while, Diane?" I asked again. Slower this time, he capped the bottle and finally looked at me properly. Not with concern, not with curiosity, but with mild impatience, the kind you reserve for someone who's delaying something obvious. "A week," he said. 2 at most. I told you? That 2 weeks. 14 days of noise that wasn't mine. 14 days of conversations I didn't choose. 14 days of waking up in a house that no longer felt like mine. "And you decided all of that without me," I said. Diane sighed, already tired of the discussion. Mom, you're overthinking this. Overthinking. That word had followed me my entire life. Whenever I expressed discomfort, it was overthinking. Whenever I hesitated, it was sensitivity. Whenever I wanted space, it was selfishness. Chloe stepped in beside him, her tone smoothing over his irritation like a practiced reflex. Iva, we didn't mean any harm, she said. We just assumed you'd understand. Assumed. Another word that landed heavy in my chest. You assumed. I repeated. You didn't ask. Dion raised his hand slightly as if calming a child. Because you're my mother. I didn't think I needed formal permission. Formal permission. As if basic respect were bureaucracy. I walked past them toward the hallway. The guest room door was still half open. I pushed it wider. What I saw removed any remaining doubt. Clothes neatly laid out on the bed. Not just a few items, but enough for weeks. Toiletries lined up with intention, not convenience. A laptop plugged in beside the nightstand. Shoes placed carefully by the wall. This wasn't temporary. This was settling in. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger yet, but recognition. They hadn't come to ask. They had come to claim. A week, I asked quietly, still standing in the doorway. Diane appeared behind me. 2 at most. We wanted to be comfortable. Comfortable. In my space. At the cost of my comfort. I turned around slowly. And when exactly was I supposed to say no? I asked. Before or after you unpacked? Dion frowned. Mom, don't turn this into a confrontation. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. A confrontation, I said. You walked into my home without permission. You unpacked. You planned your stay. And now you're surprised I'm upset. Chloe crossed her arms again. Her patience was thinning. Iva, honestly, she said. Most parents would be happy to help. There it was. The comparison, the unspoken accusation. If you were a better mother, this wouldn't be a problem. I looked at her directly. Most parents are asked first, I said. The room went quiet. Diane shifted his weight, clearly irritated now. So what? You want us to leave because we didn't phrase it the right way? No, I said. I want you to understand that my life isn't an open resource. He shook his head. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we moved in permanently. Because you did, I replied, without my consent. That word, consent, seemed to irritate him. You're making this sound transactional? He snapped. We're family. A family. Again the shield. The excuse. The weapon. I took a breath. You know what hurts the most, I said calmly. Not the suitcases. Not the assumption. It's how easy it was for you to forget that I'm a person. Dion looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? When was the last time you came here just to see me? I asked. Not because you needed something, not because it was convenient. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I call you, he said defensively. I text you. Yes, I replied, when you need something, or when it fits into your schedule. That's not fair. It is, I said. You just don't like hearing it. His voice rose. So this is what this is about, old grievances. No, I said. It's about patterns. I walked back into the living room. Chloe had taken my armchair again. My chair. The one by the window. She looked up as I approached and quickly stood, suddenly aware. Sorry, she said. I didn't realize. It's fine, I said, though it wasn't. Nothing about this was fine. Dion followed me, rubbing his face in frustration. So what do you want? He asked. Tell us what you need. I looked at him. I needed you to ask, I said, before deciding for me. But we're already here, he said flatly. What do you want us to do now? Go find a hotel at night? That's not reasonable. There it was. The trap. Once people take without permission, they frame refusal as cruelty. You should have thought of that before, I said. His eyes hardened. You're really going to do this? I nodded slowly. Less. Chloe stepped forward, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Ava, please. We don't want to cause problems. If it's about money, we can help. Utilities. Groceries. Whatever. It's not about money, I said. Then what is it? Dion demanded. I met his gaze. It's about dignity. That stopped him. For my entire life. I continued. I've been available. I've adjusted. I've made room. And every time I did, it taught you that I didn't need consideration. That's not true, he said quickly. Isn't it? I asked. Look around. You didn't even hesitate. He was silent. I took one step closer. This is my home, I said quietly. And right now, I need you to leave. The words fell like stones. Chloe gasped. Ava. Dion stared at me like I had just spoken another language. You can't be serious? I am. You're kicking us out. His voice cracked with disbelief. Your own son? I'm asking you to respect me? I said. For the first time. He laughed sharply, pacing now. This is insane. You're choosing your comfort over your family. No, I replied. I'm choosing myself. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. Whether from genuine hurt or frustration, I couldn't tell. I hope this is worth it, she said. I really do. Dion grabbed one of the suitcases roughly. You know what, he snapped. Fine. We'll go. But don't act surprised when everyone hears about this. There it was. The threat dressed as truth. I didn't flinch. Tell whoever you want, I said. The truth doesn't change. He froze. You really don't care, he said quietly. I swallowed. I care, I said. That's why I'm doing this. He dragged the suitcase toward the door. Chloe followed, wiping her face. Before leaving, she turned back once more. What kind of mother does this? I answered without hesitation. The kind who finally stopped disappearing. The door closed behind them. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. But it was honest. And for the first time in decades, I knew I hadn't betrayed myself. The door closed behind them with a sound so soft it almost felt unreal. No shouting. No final words echoing down the hallway. Just the quiet click of a lock returning to its place. I stood there longer than I should have, my hands still hovering near the door as if some part of me expected it to open again. As if Diane might come back in, laugh awkwardly, and say this had all been a misunderstanding. But nothing happened. The hallway outside my condo remained silent. I slowly turned and walked back into the living room. The space looked the same. The sofa, the rug, the window. But it felt altered, like a room after a storm has passed through. Not destroyed. Just changed. The suitcases were gone. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, my chest felt tight, like something heavy had settled there and refused to move. I sat down in my armchair by the window, my chair, and stared out at the street below. Cars passed. Someone laughed on the sidewalk. Life continued with complete indifference to the emotional earthquake that had just taken place in my home. That was when my phone vibrated. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Diane, hope you're happy. 3 words, no anger spelled out, no explanation, just accusation wrapped in disappointment. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because anything I said would only pull me back into the familiar role of explaining myself until I was exhausted and apologizing for things I wasn't sorry for. Another vibration followed. Chloe, Diane is very upset. I don't think he'll talk to you for a long time. I hope your pride is worth it, pride. As if protecting my space were vanity, as if boundaries were arrogance, as if my need for peace were some kind of moral failure. I turned the phone face down on the table. The grocery bags were still sitting exactly where I had dropped them earlier, untouched. What felt like hours ago was probably less than an hour, but emotionally, it felt like a lifetime. I stood up and began putting the groceries away. Not because I cared about organization at that moment, but because I needed my hands busy. I needed something predictable. Something that made sense. Cans into the pantry, vegetables into the refrigerator, bread in its usual basket. Each item returning to its place felt like a small anchor in a sea of emotions. When I finished, I made myself tea. I chose my favorite mug, the light blue one with a tiny chip on the rim. I had owned it for years. It fit perfectly in my hands like it knew me. As the water heated, my hands started to shake. That's when it hit me. Not the anger, the doubt. Had I gone too far? Had I turned a moment that could have been resolved into something irreversible? Was I really going to be that mother? The one whispered about at family gatherings. The one whose name was followed by a sigh and a shake of the head. I carried the mug back to the living room and sat down again. The silence was heavier now. Not the peaceful silence I had grown used to over the years, but the kind that presses against your ears, reminding you of what you've lost. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Diane. It was my sister, Olivia. Ava, what happened? Diane called me very upset. He says you kicked him out when they only needed to stay a few days. Is that true? Of course he had called her. Of course his version had already begun circulating. Neat, simplified, carefully edited to remove the parts where he hadn't asked. I stared at the message for a long time. I could already imagine the conversation. Diane, hurt and offended, painting himself as the rejected son. Olivia, concerned but conflicted, trying to understand both sides. And me, the difficult one, the selfish one, the one who had changed. For a moment, I felt that familiar urge rise in my chest. The urge to explain, to justify, to soften the story so no one thought badly of me. I almost picked up the phone almost. Then I remembered Serena. My friend Serena, sitting in her hospital bed 3 months before she died. Her body frail, her voice barely above a whisper, but her eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. The biggest mistake I made, she had told me, squeezing my hand, was caring more about how people saw me than how I saw myself. I closed my eyes. She had spent 70 years being what others needed. And in the end, she couldn't remember when she had lived for herself. I set the phone down without replying. Not out of anger. Out of self-preservation. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over. Dion's expression, Chloe's words, the way the door had closed behind them. Every time my mind tried to pull me back into guilt, I asked myself one question: if I had let them stay, how would I feel right now? The answer was immediate. Small, invisible. Resentful. I eventually fell asleep not because the doubts disappeared, but because my body simply couldn't stay awake any longer. I woke up the next morning to sunlight filtering softly through my curtains. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. Then memory rushed back. I sat up slowly and followed my usual routine. Brushing my teeth, washing my face, moving through the morning like muscle memory was carrying me when my heart felt too heavy to lead. As I walked toward the kitchen, my eyes drifted toward the guest room. The door was still slightly open. Chloe's things were still there, neatly arranged, waiting. A reminder that what happened hadn't been a dream. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. People heading to work, children walking to school. Life continuing, just as it had the day before. My phone lay on the table beside me. When I finally turned it on, there were more messages. 3 missed calls from Olivia, 1 message from my cousin Tanisha asking if I was okay, and 1 from Diane. I'm coming by this afternoon to pick up our things. You don't need to be there if you don't want to. I read that message several times. The words were neutral, controlled, distant. I replied simply, I'll be here. Ring the bell when you arrive. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning, not because my condo needed it, but because I did. Vacuuming. Wiping counters. Changing sheets that didn't really need changing. It was therapy disguised as housekeeping. Around noon, I finally called Olivia. Ava, she said the moment she answered. I've been worried sick. I'm sorry, I replied. I needed time. As she hesitated, Don told me what happened well. His version. I'm sure he did. There was a pause. I want to hear yours, she said. So I told her. About coming home to Suitcases. About not being asked. About the assumptions, about how small I felt standing in my own home. When I finished, Olivia sighed. I understand why you were upset, she said carefully. But don't you think maybe you overreacted? He's your son. There it was, the sentence I had expected. I didn't overreact, I said gently. I reacted. But families help each other, she replied. We don't ask permission every time. I took a deep breath. Do you remember when you lived with me after your divorce? I asked. Yes, of course. Do you know why I never asked you to leave? I continued. She didn't answer. Because I was scared, I said. Scared you'd think I didn't love you, scared I'd be labeled selfish. So I stayed quiet and taught everyone that my boundaries didn't exist. There was silence on the line. I never knew you felt that way. Olivia said softly. Exactly, I replied. Because I never said anything, and now I finally am, she exhaled. I need to think about this. Take your time, I said. When we hung up, I felt something shift, but firmness. At 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Diane standing there alone, carrying 2 large canvas bags. Hello, Mom, he said. His voice was flat. Hello. Diane. He walked past me without looking around, heading straight for the guest room. I stayed in the living room, listening to the sounds of zippers, drawers opening and closing, the quiet efficiency of someone completing a task without emotion. 10 minutes later, he emerged. The bags hung heavy on his shoulders. Can I use the restroom before I leave? He asked. Yes, I said. When he passed by me, it hit me how strange it felt. My own son asking permission in the house he grew up in. The bathroom door closed, water ran, and for a moment, grief washed over me. Not regret. Grief. When he returned, he stopped at the doorway. Is there anything you want to say? He asked. I looked at him carefully. I love you, I said. Always. But I won't disappear anymore to make you comfortable. He nodded once. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Diane. The door closed. And this time, I knew it wouldn't open again today. I sat back down in my armchair, hands trembling slightly. I had held my boundary even when it hurt. And as painful as that silence was, the house felt quieter after Diane left. Not peaceful, just exposed. Like a place where all the furniture had been pushed aside, leaving nothing but the truth standing in the middle of the room. I stayed seated in my armchair long after the door had closed behind him. My hands rested in my lap, fingers loosely intertwined, as if holding myself together required physical effort. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Time didn't pause for emotional crisis. It never did. That afternoon stretched slowly, each minute carrying the weight of everything unsaid. I moved through the condo with careful steps, as though sudden movement might shatter something fragile inside me. Around early evening, my phone rang again. Olivia. I stared at the screen before answering. Ava, she said immediately. Are you okay? I'm breathing, I replied. That's something? She exhaled. Dion is devastated. I know. He keeps saying you've changed, she continued. That you weren't like this before. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. That's true, I said quietly. I wasn't. There was a pause on the line. He says you threw him out like a stranger, Olivia added carefully. I closed my eyes. Did he tell you how he arrived? I asked. Did he tell you about the suitcases already inside my living room? Well, he said they came early because of work. Early isn't the same as uninvited, I said. Olivia sighed. Ava, I understand why you were upset. But don't you think you could have handled it differently? That sentence landed softly. But it still landed. Differently how? I asked. Maybe let them stay a night? She suggested. Talk it through later. He's your son. I let out a slow breath. And if I had done that? I asked. What would I have taught him? She didn't answer. That my boundaries only matter when it's convenient. I continued. That my discomfort is negotiable. That I'll always fold if enough guilt is applied. That's not what anyone thinks of you, she said gently. It's exactly what they think, I replied. They just never say it out loud. There was silence again. I could almost hear Olivia thinking, re-examining memories she had never questioned before. Ava, she said eventually, when I stayed with you after my divorce you never once complained. I smiled faintly. No, I said. I didn't. And you were fine with it, she added. I wasn't, I replied. I was just scared. Scared of what? Off being seen as selfish, I said. Off disappointing you. Of losing love. Her voice softened. You should have told me. I know, I said, and that's on me. But silence doesn't mean consent, Olivia. It just means fear. The line stayed quiet for a long moment. I think I understand more than I did yesterday, she said finally. That wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. After we hung up, I placed the phone on the table and sat there, letting the quiet settle again. Something felt different now. Not lighter, but steadier. That night I slept more deeply than I expected. Not because the pain was gone, but because my body finally trusted that I wasn't about to abandon myself. The next few days passed in an unusual rhythm. No calls from Diane, no messages from Chloe, just space. At first, the silence felt punitive, like being put in emotional timeout, but slowly I realized something important. The silence wasn't empty. It was uncluttered. I woke up when I wanted. I made breakfast slowly. I sat on my balcony without checking my phone every few minutes. And each day, the guilt loosened its grip just a little, until one afternoon my phone buzzed again. A text from Olivia. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About boundaries. About how much you always gave. I don't think we ever asked what it cost you. I stared at the message longer than I needed to. That single sentence did something unexpected. It validated me. Not dramatically, not loudly, but sincerely. 3 days later the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door slowly. Diane stood there, holding 2 empty canvas bags. He looked tired, not angry, not defensive. Just tired. I'm here to get the rest of our things, he said quietly. Come in, I replied. He stepped inside but didn't move past the entryway. The condo felt unfamiliar to him now, and that realization cut deeper than I expected. I'll be quick, he added. I nodded and stepped aside. He walked down the hallway to the guest room. I didn't follow. Instead, I stayed in the living room, listening to the sounds of him packing. Zippers, drawers, fabric shifting. Each sound felt like punctuation. When he came back out, the bags were heavier now. He stopped near the door and hesitated. "Can I use the bathroom before I go?" he asked. "Yes," I said. The fact that he asked broke something open inside me, not because I wanted authority over him, but because it showed awareness. He returned a few minutes later, lifted the bags again, and turned toward the door. "Ava," he said, stopping. I looked at him. "I don't agree with what you did," he admitted. "But I can't pretend nothing happened either." "That's fair," I said. He nodded once. Then unexpectedly, he added, "I never thought about how much you gave because you never made it visible." "I didn't know how," I replied. He looked down, then back at me. "I need time," he said. "I know," I answered. He opened the door. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. "You're not wrong for wanting space," he said. I just wasn't ready to hear it. Then he left. The door closed. This time the silence felt different. Not like punishment, like space for something new. I returned to my armchair and sat down. Outside, the late afternoon light softened the city, bathing everything in gold. For the first time since that Thursday, I didn't question my decision. I didn't replay it. I didn't bargain with it. I accepted it, because boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which ones can grow. After Diane left that afternoon, the condo didn't feel empty. It felt unfamiliar, not because the furniture had moved or something was missing, but because the emotional weight of his presence lingered in the air, like a scent that refused to fade. I walked through each room slowly that evening. The kitchen, the hallway, the guest room. Everything was exactly where it belonged, and yet nothing felt the same. The guest room was empty again. No clothes on the bed, no toiletries on the dresser, no laptop humming quietly by the nightstand. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like an ending. That night, I sat in my armchair longer than usual, my hands folded around a mug that had gone cold without me noticing. Outside, the city lights blinked on one by one, people settling into lives that hadn't just been cracked open by truth. I wondered how many women were sitting exactly like this, having finally said no, and now questioning whether they had just said goodbye to something they loved. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, not because of noise, because of absence. For years, my mornings had unconsciously adjusted themselves around the possibility of someone else's needs. Even when I lived alone, my body had remained alert, waiting for a call, waiting for a knock, waiting to be needed. That morning, nothing came. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the street wake up. My phone remained silent. At first, that silence felt sharp. Each hour without a message from Diane felt like proof that I had pushed too far, that I had damaged something permanently. But as the days passed, the silence began to soften. It stopped feeling like punishment. It started feeling like distance. And distance, I was learning, wasn't always rejection. Sometimes it was processing. A week later, a message arrived. Not a conversation. Just a photo. Diane and Chloe standing in front of their condo, newly renovated, smiling politely for the camera. "Diane, renovations are finished. We're back home." That was it. No. "How are you?" No. "We should talk. Just information." I stared at the image longer than I needed to. They looked fine, and that hurt more than I expected, because it confirmed something I had been trying not to think about. They didn't need me. They never had. I typed a response carefully. "I'm glad you're comfortable in your space now. Take care." I didn't add anything else. I didn't soften it. I didn't chase connection. I let the message stand as it was. The following weeks moved slowly, not dramatically, just quietly. I returned to my routines. Grocery shopping on Thursdays, coffee with friends on Tuesdays, long afternoons with books I had once promised myself I'd read, when I had time. Time, it turned out, had always been there. I just hadn't been allowed to claim it. Sometimes, grief crept in unexpectedly, like when I passed the children's section at the bookstore and remembered Diane's favorite bedtime story. Or when I saw a mother and son laughing together in a cafe. In those moments, the ache returned, not regret but mourning, not for the decision I made, but for the version of motherhood I had believed in. The one where love meant endless sacrifice, the one where boundaries were betrayal. That belief had shaped my entire life. Letting it go felt like losing a part of myself. One afternoon, Olivia called again. "I keep thinking about something you said," she admitted. "About how silence isn't consent." "Less," I replied. "I think we all benefited from you being quiet," she said slowly, and we never stopped to wonder why. Her honesty surprised me. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm just done disappearing." There was a pause. I don't think Diane is angry anymore either, she added. I think he's confused. That sounded right. Confusion often comes before growth. A month passed. Then another. Until one afternoon, as I stood in the produce aisle selecting tomatoes, my phone rang. Diane. Not a message. A call. My heart sped up instantly. I stepped aside, my fingers trembling slightly as I answered. Hello. Hi. Mom. His voice was different. Not defensive. Not tense. Careful. How are you? He asked. I'm well, I replied. And you? A pause. I've been thinking a lot, he said. I didn't interrupt. I was angry at first. He continued. I thought you were punishing me, that you chose your comfort over me. He exhaled slowly, but after everything settled I realized something. I held my breath. I didn't ask, he said quietly. I assumed. And that wasn't fair. Something loosened in my chest. I'm not saying you handled everything perfectly, he added, but you were right about the main thing. I closed my eyes. Thank you for saying that, I replied. Chloe and I talked. He went on. She said she's always felt like I take your generosity for granted, that I treat it like an obligation instead of a gift. That stung and healed. At the same time, I think she's right, he said. We stood in silence for a moment, connected only by breath and honesty. Mom, he said, would you like to have lunch with me sometime? Just us. No pressure. Just talk. I felt tears rise. Not the heavy ones, the lighter kind. I'd like that, I said. When we hung up, I stood there in the grocery store for a long moment, holding a tomato in my hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Not the hope that everything would go back to how it was, but the hope that something better might replace it. That night, sitting in my armchair, I understood something clearly for the first time. Loss and strength can exist together. You don't have to choose between them. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for your children, is to stop teaching them that love means erasing yourself.